These days, 2.5 million won't get you much. But back in 1997, it was enough to get you Monaco captain Emmanuel Petit, the ponytailed Frenchman who'd go on to have a storied international and club career. Many are familiar with the urban myth about how Petit was so close to signing for Tottenham, only to pull a fast one and sign for its local rival Arsenal. Catching the eye of many, it was Tottenham Hotspur who looked closest to signing the combative center midfielder at first. He was in North London, having arranged a meeting with the then Spurs chairman, Sir Alan Sugar, who many will recognize from The Apprentice on BBC One. Having been shown around the stadium and everything looking okay in terms of a prospective move, Petit then managed to get the club to call him a taxi. Many thought he was going to the airport to head back to France, but instead he nipped down the road to Highbury, home of the Spurs' fiercest rivals Arsenal, to meet with the chairman David Dine and manager Arsene Wenger. Wenger, familiar with Petit from his time managing Monaco, was able to convince Petit then and there, so much so that he signed that very afternoon. To add insult to injury, Tottenham paid the $20 cab fare that basically took him to sign for their rivals. "If they want to send me the bill, I am happy to pay it," Petit joked on Sky Sports' Fantasy League program many years later when quizzed about this famous transfer story. When Manchester City suddenly acquired its insane level of spending power, it did what any self-respecting kid in a sweet shop with a pocket full of change would do: spend like there's no tomorrow. They offered $7.6 million for Portsmouth striker Benjani Mwaruwari, a sum that many would have described as very generous. Man City had only been made aware that Benjani was available the night before the transfer deadline, so it didn't have much time to complete the move. Despite being a huge hit amongst the Portsmouth faithful, the offer was too good to turn down, according to Pompey manager Harry Redknapp, and the last-minute deal began to gain some momentum. Sven-Göran Eriksson, the then Man City manager, traveled down to London the morning of the deadline to apply for a work permit for Benjani, then headed back all the way to Manchester to await the arrival of his new striker. But boy, was he left to sweat it out. The Zimbabwe international was due to catch a flight from Southampton to Manchester at 3:15 p.m. in order to undergo his medical. However, Benjani managed to miss that flight and the subsequent 5 p.m. flight before the third flight at 6:45 p.m. was cancelled. The tale is told that Benjani fell asleep at the airport. However, many believe that he never really wanted to complete the move. To miss one flight on transfer deadline day is unfortunate. To miss two suggests he never wanted to go in the first place. Eventually, he did travel and underwent his medical at Man City at 11:15 p.m. Despite a scare regarding the missing paperwork from his transfer from French club Auxerre to Portsmouth, the deal was signed in time, and Benjani went on to play in 23 matches for the Blues from 2008 to 2010. Without question, one of the most infamous stories of deadline day folly is that of the effort, confusion, and humiliation for striker Peter Odemwingie. Amongst the monumental amount of miscommunication between parties, the central figure in this tale is the Nigerian Odemwingie, who at first appeared to be going through the formalities of finalizing a move from West Bromwich Albion to Queen's Park Rangers. The striker drove himself down to London believing it was just a medical, dotting some I's and crossing some T's. However, once he arrived at the QPR facility, he was refused entry to the ground as the clubs maintained the deal was not finalized. As time elapsed with him still stationary outside the ground, the striker was seen signing autographs outside of Loftus Road and was also interviewed by Sky Sports News, telling reporters from his car that he was ready for a new chapter, convinced that things would be sorted out. To his disbelief and dismay, the move broke down and nothing was completed, meaning he had to drive all the way back to West Bromwich, a 125-mile trip that probably felt 10 times longer. Not to mention the awkward linking up with teammates he'd already said goodbye to. It recently emerged that the core reason why wires had been crossed was because the deal relied on the premise of winger Junior Hoylett going the other way and joining West Brom from QPR, something which didn't materialize. a crucial piece of information Odom Wingy was not aware of until he'd made the lonely trip from Birmingham to London, and it was too late. There's not really a lot that can be done in 14 seconds unless you are Usain Bolt or obscenely good at Rubik's Cube. However, that was all the difference in Leicester City's new signing falling through the cracks. Leicester was trying hard to sell Danny Drinkwater to Premier League giant Chelsea for as much as possible, and in the end, after much haggling over the price, Chelsea announced the signing for a generous $35 million on the 2017 summer transfer deadline day. With that move done and dusted, it paved the way for Leicester to finally push over the line the signing of his replacement, Adrian Silva. However, FIFA blocked Leicester's attempts to register the Portugal international following a $22 million move from Sporting Lisbon because the paperwork landed with the FA just 14 seconds after the deadline. As a result, Silva was initially not allowed to train with his new teammates, just like getting a new toy for Christmas without batteries, only to arrive at the battery store after it is closed, by 14 seconds, and won't reopen for another 4 months. Leicester even claimed to have forensic evidence to prove they had actually met the deadline. FIFA refused and were also unwilling to fast-track an appeal by Leicester to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. The signing was technically complete, however, the issue was that he was not able to be registered. Another case whereby no fault of the player, more so the people pushing the paper behind a desk. While the midfielder ended up recently making his debut for the Foxes, the 4-month wait because of 14 seconds hardly seems worth it. Silva was, as you would imagine, left disgusted by the outcome. Was this harsh and a lack of common sense by the governing bodies, or were they right to stick to the rules? In the summer transfer window of 2015, Real Madrid came famously close to signing Manchester United goalkeeper David De Gea, only for the deal to mysteriously collapse over what they described as paperwork. The deal was reportedly understood to be a cash and player deal with current Real Madrid shot stopper Keylor Navas heading the opposite direction from Madrid to Old Trafford. In what can only be described as a proper shambles, it is understood that the necessary documentation of both players had not been passed on and registered before the deadline. Interestingly, in Spain, they are not able to be granted an extension to complete deals at certain stages past the deadline, as is the case in England. The details of this high-profile farce are widely reported to still be mysterious and one of the greatest cases of football he said she said you'll ever see. The ensuing fallout saw the two clubs blaming each other for scuppering the deal, with both issuing contrasting statements as to what the cause was. The real salt in the wound aspect of the De Gea transfer saga are the claims that Navas's documentation wasn't sent over to Madrid due to a faulty fax machine in the Spanish capital. Once the documents finally had come through, it was too late. We'll let you make up your own mind on who's truly to blame for this one. Navas spoke of how deadline day was one of the worst days of his career as he saw his move to Manchester United break down. "I cried when the transfer window was closed near my wife," said Navas. "I'm human and everything exploded. I was waiting in the airport even without suitcases. I was not on the plane, but I was near." Nowadays, Everton and Liverpool form one of the strongest rivalries in the league, with the Merseyside derbies highlighting on every football fan's calendar. With Goodison Park, Everton's home ground, just around the corner from Anfield Road, Liverpool's home ground, the two clubs have grown in their hatred and disposition for the other, with the desire to beat their rival one of their biggest goals at the start of the season. However, what you might not have known about the two clubs is that before the rivalry had existed, Everton's home ground was in fact Anfield Road, the very ground that Liverpool now call their home and one of the tougher places to travel to in world football. According to Everton's official website, the land at Anfield Road was leased to the club during the late 1800s by the Orrell brothers, who were local brewers. The Toffees would play their first game at Anfield against Earlstown on September 27, 1884, and would play their first Football League match as a professional club on September 8, 1888. Liverpool, of course, would not be founded for another 4 years after that date. Everton would leave Anfield Road on January 25, 1892, opting to move to the north side of Stanley Park, to the ground and area now known as Goodison Park. Liverpool, who wanted to be called Everton Athletic at the time, would then claim Anfield Road as their home ground. So yes, Everton were in fact at Anfield before Liverpool. There are a few ways to stop pitch invasions: electric fences, a heavy police presence, or making your team so bad that no fans turn up to run on the field in the first place. But the Romanian 4th Division is a rough and ready place. Back in 2003, Steaua Nicolae Balcescu had been threatened with expulsion from the league after a series of pitch invasions and clashes. Steaua's chairman, Alexandra Kringus, perhaps showing why the team he was running were in the 4th Division rather than the 1st, decided the best way to stop the hooligans was by building a crocodile-infested moat around the pitch. Because if you can't build a crocodile-infested moat around the pitch, what's the point in being in charge of a football club, eh? "This is not a joke," insisted Kringus. "We can get crocodiles easy enough and feed them on meat from the local abattoir. The ditch is planned to be wide enough that no one could manage to jump over it. Anyone who attempted to do so would have to deal with the crocs. I think that the problem of fans running onto the pitch will be solved once and for all." This wasn't some slapdash plan, though. Kringus had had a good long think about health and safety, too. He planned to build the moat far enough from the pitch that players wouldn't accidentally tumble to their doom. He even thought of the crocs, too. Romanian winters can be harsh, so the water would be heated by electric pipes. You may not be surprised to discover that local authorities rejected the scheme. Ah, isn't it kind of wonderful to make misleading titles shock subtitles? Well, the club under the microscope here is Torquay United, not the one in Manchester. Down by 2-0 at halftime, Torquay United needed to salvage something from the game if they intended to stay up and not become the first team to get relegated from the Football League in 1987. Jim McNichol pulled one back just after half-time from a deflected free kick. A ray of hope was now visible. But what happened next was something no one could have predicted. As scorer, McNichol ran towards the touchline to chase a dying ball. A German shepherd came out of nowhere and bit the former right-back. Apparently, the dog, named Bryn, thought that the defender was running in to attack his handler and hence gashed McNichol's legs with its teeth. The fullback was down for 5 minutes, and 5 minutes were added as injury time. And as luck would have it, Paul Dobson scored the equalizer in the final minute of added time, which was just about enough to keep Torquay up. 17 stitches and 3 holes on Jim McNichol's leg was perhaps worth the pain. A brewery's offer of a lifetime supply of free beer to the first Austrian to score in Euro 2008 tournament did not produce an avalanche of goals. Instead, it was Ivica Vastic who won the prize by notching the country's only goal of the competition, a 93rd minute penalty. Many players have scored hat tricks, 3 goals in the same match, during their lifetime. But few have the claim to fame that West Ham and England defender Alvin Martin has regarding hat tricks. In West Ham's 8-1 home win against Newcastle United in April 1986, Martin scored 3 goals against 3 different goalkeepers, making him the only player to score his hat trick in such a fashion. The defender netted his first goal against Newcastle goalkeeper Martin Thomas, who was then replaced by Chris Hedworth due to injury. Martin scored against the substitute keeper, who was then replaced by Peter Beardsley toward the end of the match, whom he promptly scored against to complete his unusual but remarkable feat. According to the BBC, no other player has ever scored a hat trick like this. Time for some Danish football now, and we pity local side Ebeltoft, who were robbed of a deserved draw when playing Norragare in the domestic competition. Norragare were leading 4-3 with seconds remaining when Ebeltoft went on the attack. As they pressed forward, however, referee Henning Erikstrup went to blow the final whistle. Only problem was that his false teeth fell out as he went to blow the whistle, meaning that no noise came out and play continued as normal. Ebeltoft scored to make it 4-4 by the time that Erikstrup found his false teeth and put them back into his mouth. So, 4-4, right? Not so much. Erikstrup disallowed the goal and blew the final whistle, handing Norrøger a 4-3 win. Ebeltoft protested the match immediately following the loss and took the result to the equivalent of what is the Football Association in Denmark, but their protests were denied. Final score: Norrøger 4, Ebeltoft 3. A different kind of receiver trouble now. Remember the fun you had in German classes at school when it came time to learn to count to 10? Eins, zwei, drei, vier, fünf, sechs, ho ho. You said sex, days of fun. So imagine the hilarity in 2004 when Franz Beckenbauer decided to take O2 up on the offer of a personalized phone number and chose 0176, the usual prefix for chat lines, 666666. Hundreds of men apparently started calling Beckenbauer looking for sexy times, enough to make a Kaiser pine for the days when Sepp would show up on screen as the phone shrilled into action. The final straw came when the thing went off at 3 a.m. and Beckenbauer answered to a gruff man, asking him to talk dirty and turn him on. Beckenbauer, who earned the number after appearing looking serious but satisfied, hey, stop that at the back, in a series of adverts for the mobile company, had wanted those digits so that it would be easy to remember. But he decided at that point he could handle something more complicated than his hot number, as Der Spiegel put it. You might have heard of Harry Redknapp, new manager of Queen's Park Rangers, almost got the England job, not a Fock and Wheeler dealer. Redknapp famously bristles at suggestions he is just a crafty cockney, a reputation largely stemming from his days as West Ham's manager when punts on the likes of Paolo Di Canio and Trevor Sinclair and cut-price deals for John Hartson and Paul Kitson were handsomely rewarded by some fine performances. Yet while he enjoyed success in some of his transfer dealings at Upton Park, they were rivaled by the failures. The 18 miners received from Leeds for Rio Ferdinand was frittered away on no-hopers and Titi Camara. There was the curious case of Gary Charles, or the time Redknapp claimed Florin Raducioiu went shopping at Harvey Nichols with his wife instead of turning up for a League Cup tie at Stockport, which West Ham lost thanks to a storming own goal from Aye Ndawi. But none could match the oddity that was Marco Boogers' brief but eventful spell in East London. Boogers arrived at West Ham in the summer of 1995 for $1 from Sparta Rotterdam, having built up a perfectly acceptable reputation in the Dutch league. But it would later emerge that Redknapp had never seen him play, instead relying on a video of the striker. That in itself is not so strange. Redknapp was hardly the first manager to rely on a tape. But it did him no favors when things took a turn for the worse. This being the days before Twitter, YouTube, and European football experts, supporters had no idea what to expect, and Boogers made his debut on the opening day of the season as a second-half substitute in a 2-1 home defeat by Leeds. He made little impact, but not to worry. He was in a foreign land, plenty of time to make his name. As it turned out, his next appearance off the bench a few days later would be rather more eventful. West Ham were trailing Manchester United 2-1 when Boogers was thrown on with the minutes ticking away. He did not take long to make his mark, on Gary Neville, that is. Shortly after coming on, Boogers flew through the air and fulfilled many a Liverpool fan's lifelong dream, taking Neville out with what the Sun called a sickening horror tackle. Thankfully, Neville was not hurt and finished the match, but Boogers was immediately sent off and given a 4-match ban for his recklessness. That should have been that, but Boogers, affected by the media attention and suffering from homesickness, went back to Holland. Again, nothing remarkable about that. Foreign player visits own country shock. He was not the last West Ham player to do so, after all. In 1998, the Chile defender Javier Margas played 3 games in England before going AWOL for a year. He returned the following season and showed his commitment to the West Ham cause by dyeing his hair claret and blue. For Boogers, though, a simple trip home turned into one of the strangest stories in English football, as it was reported that Barmy Boogers, as one paper put it, had gone to live on a caravan site in Holland. West Ham's managing director, Peter Storey, was forced to deny rumors that Boogers had been deemed mentally unfit, to play in September 1995. "We had our meeting in the Hilton Hotel at Amsterdam," he said. "I didn't see a caravan, or a tent for that matter. He is certainly not mentally unstable. It is absolute nonsense." Story was telling the truth because the story had stemmed from a misunderstanding between a member of staff at West Ham and a journalist, and snowballed from there. Strangest of all, the club employee Bill Prosser cleared the story up in a letter to the Fiver in 2005. Here's a stitch-up of a work colleague, albeit an accidental one. "In the 90s, I was the PA announcer at Upton Park. I also handled all of the club's travel arrangements. You will remember that Marco Boogers famously went a bit doolally shortly after joining the club and was reported to be living in a caravan in Holland. Although this was 10 years ago, it is often quoted as fact to this day. Unfortunately, it is untrue, and it is my fault. Marco was depressed after being sent off in his second appearance for West Ham at Old Trafford and disappeared for a few days. West Ham's club call reporter phoned me and said he was trying to find Boogers for an interview, but could not reach him. He asked if I had booked any flights for him. I told him I hadn't, but added, if he has gone back to Holland, he's probably gone by car again. The reporter misheard me and stated on club call that I had said, if he's gone back to Holland, he's probably gone to his caravan. As you know, journalists often listen to club call, which explains why, the following day, the back page headline in The Sun was, "Barmy Boogers living in a caravan. The legend endures. I feel a bit responsible for his misfortune." Boogers made only 2 more appearances for West Ham, and after suffering a knee injury, he returned to the Dutch League in February 1996. It is easy to laugh now, but, as Redknapp admitted, West Ham did not handle the situation especially well. This was the start of English football's foreign revolution, and perhaps there was not enough care for foreign players, which has changed now. All of which still did not stop Redknapp from naming Boogers as his worst ever signing at West Ham. At least he kept Sandra out of it. "There was an explosion of green," said David O'Leary, remembering the reaction to his winning penalty for the Republic of Ireland against Romania at the 1990 World Cup. It put them through to the quarter-finals, where they would meet Italy. "The biggest mistake was standing still. I nearly got killed by all my teammates. Only one of them might have meant to do any harm. The substitute Bernie Slaven, who had spent the whole of the tournament on the bench. I basically trained for 6 weeks with a group of fringe players," Slaven told the Glasgow Evening Times in 2003. He was pleased to be there, but didn't hold out much hope of playing. "We called ourselves the Muppets." By the time Ireland reached the knockout stages, Slaven had had enough. He wanted to get home to his dogs. "I became a figure of fun when I called home on that trip," he recalled. "While others were speaking to their wives, I would go on the phone and say, 'Put the dog on.'" The Middlesbrough forward was taking his dog for a walk when he found out he'd been called up to Ireland's World Cup squad and once left Ayresome Park at half-time to take the dog out after being substituted. "I could see the floodlights and hear the crowd from where I was walking, which was surreal," he said. Not quite as surreal as the picture that Tony Cascarino, Slaven's World Cup roommate, paints in his autobiography. "I'd be sitting in the bed alongside and Bernie would be howling like Lassie into the phone, 'Woof, woof, aru, aru, woof.' He'd be kissing the receiver and lavishing affection, 'Hello, lovey-dovey,' on a dog. The first time it happened, I nearly wet myself. The reason was simple," Slaven explained, trying to save everyone a change of underwear. "I got more sense out of her." Unfortunately, his canine chum couldn't get her chops around the words Brian Deane or Neville Brothers Mayor to warn Bernie off betting that Boro wouldn't beat Manchester United at Old Trafford in December 1998. Labeled as the hardest man in English football to date, he was a young apprentice boxer who later took up football. He joined Manchester United for a record $375 million, snubbing Kenny Dalglish, who was then the manager at Blackburn Rovers. Bought as a replacement for the oft-injured Brian Robson, Roy Keane would, however, go on to cement his berth in central midfield for the next 12 years in a Manchester United side, which would dominate the English Premier League. His penchant for yellow cards, his infamous prawn sandwich statement, and his various rants were nothing compared to how he would cut down to size the various players whom he felt were not giving it their all for the team. Just ask Rio Ferdinand and Darren Fletcher. His constant tussles with Patrick Vieira and his commitment and enthusiasm for the team were what endeared Keane to the Old Trafford faithful. His energy on the field even prompted Sir Alex Ferguson, after the historic 1999 semi-final win over Juventus, to say, "I felt it was an honor to be associated with such a player." The terraces of Old Trafford still sing his name, and rightly so. Well, I do not believe in curses. But the story concerning Portuguese football club Benfica and their former coach Béla Guttmann is truly mind-blowing. Béla Guttmann led Benfica to 2 consecutive European Cup wins in 1961 and 1962. After the 1962 European Cup final, Guttmann approached the Benfica board of directors for a pay rise. Despite being well-deserved for that, he was turned down. On leaving Benfica, Guttmann allegedly cursed the club, declaring, "Not in 100 years from now will Benfica ever be European champion." After that, Benfica have gone on to lose all 8 of their European finals, including 5 European Cup finals, 1963, 1965, 1968, 1988, and 1990, and 3 UEFA Cup UEFA Europa League finals, 1983, 2013, and 2014. It is known that before the 1990 final, which was played in Vienna, Eusebio prayed at his grave and asked for the curse to be broken. But Benfica couldn't win that final either. It is widely suggested that Benfica was by far the better team in both the 2013 UEFA Cup final against Chelsea and the 2014 final against Sevilla. But they couldn't win either of them, losing the later in penalties. It could be the case that the story of the team being cursed creates extra pressure on the players and the manager, which affects their nerves and performance. Well, probably everything in the history of Balotelli is somewhat controversial. One of the most insane football stories is when he caused the fire department to intervene. He invited everybody in Manchester City Club to come to his house for a party. He planned to do fireworks, but instead, he caused a fire and evacuation. Not the best time he had at Man City. This story is about his early years in Inter Milan at age 19. From Jose Mourinho interview, "We went to Kazan in the Champions League. In that match, all my strikers were injured. No Milito, no Eto'o. I was really in trouble, and Mario was the only one. Mario gets a yellow card in minute 42. So when I go to the dressing room at halftime, I spend 14 minutes of the 15 speaking only for Mario. Mario, I cannot change you. I cannot make a change. I don't have a striker on the bench. Don't touch anybody. Play only with the ball. When we lose the ball, no reaction. If somebody provokes you, no reaction. If the referee makes a mistake, no reaction. Mario, please." Minute 46, red card. Perhaps a topical discussion now that the winter transfer window has officially opened is the transfer of Ion Radu in 1998. The Romanian midfielder was sold by second division Jul Petrosani to Valsea during the official transfer window, all of which sounds normal, but he was not sold for a monetary price or value. The midfielder was sold for 500 kilos of pork, which was worth about roughly $17.50 at the time of sale. Jul Petrosani club president said that the meat will be sold to pay player salaries. Just for some fun, should Cristiano Ronaldo make the $100 million transfer from Real Madrid to Paris Saint-Germain that some tabloid media outlets have suggested, that would equate to around nearly 29 million kilograms of pork, or around 630,000 pigs. The 24 June 2020, the Puskás Stadium in Budapest would have hosted a Euro 2020 match. Hungary has a powerful football history. The country reached the Football World Cup final in 1954 and, although they didn't win, its Hungarian national team of the 1950s became legendary. This is the story of Ferenc Pancho Puskás and the Golden Team generation, which made its mark on Spanish football. In the post-war era, Hungary's national football team was supported and promoted by the Communist Hungarian People's Republic. In the wake of the 1956 Hungarian Revolution, however, the 11 players of its national team were scattered throughout the world. The majority of the team played for the club side Budapest Honvéd, who played Athletic Bilbao in the 1956-57 European Cup. Honvéd lost the away leg 3-2, but before the home leg could be played, the Hungarian Revolution erupted in Budapest. Ferenc Puskás, the outstanding player of the Golden Team, did not return home to Hungary. From 1958 to 1966, he played for Real Madrid in Spain. In his first 2 years there, Puskás was banned by FIFA under political pressure from playing football. Struggling with excess weight, and at 30 already an aging footballer, Puskás nonetheless strived to rebuild his career and his fitness. After his defection, the communist regime's beloved star Puskás became its enemy. Hungarian state security launched treason proceedings against Puskás and opened a file on him called Wanderer. This file was opened on 20th of May 1958 and closed on 26th of June 1972. Despite the odds being stacked against him, Puskás played for Real Madrid throughout his 30s. His training and hard work bore fruit. In this second phase of his career, he scored many goals and dazzled the world with his skills. Puskás was not the only Hungarian footballer to find success in Spain. The FC Barcelona players Laszlo Kubala, Zoltán Csibor, and Sándor Kocsis were also revered. Like Puskás, they had arrived in Spain after the 1956 revolution and restarted their careers there. These Hungarian players became legends of the El Clásico derby matches between club rivals Real Madrid and FC Barcelona. Kubala scored twice in 13 matches against Real Madrid, and Kocsis scored twice in 3. Madrid's beloved Pancho, his Spanish nickname, Puskás, celebrated 8 victories in 10 matches and 9 goals in total against Barcelona in the championship. His shots on goal were likened to cannon fire in Catalonia. Back in Hungary, however, news of Puskás's success was suppressed by the communist system for years. In spite of this, the glory of the Golden Team and the cult of Puskás grew stronger over time. The captain of the Golden Team returned home for the first time in 1981 when he played a gala match against England. Puskás later worked as a coach in North and South America, Spain, Greece, and Egypt. Puskás returned to Hungary in 1991 and lived the rest of his life there until his death in 2006. After the fall of communism, Puskás became widely remembered as one of the greatest footballers of all time. In 2002, Budapest's People's Stadium was renamed the Ferenc Puskás Stadium, and in 2020, on the same site, European Championship matches will be played in a new arena, the Puskás Arena. 40 years ago, on May 4, 1980, the football clubs Hajduk Split and Red Star Belgrade played their Yugoslav First League match on the Hajduk's Poljud Stadium when news spread that Josip Broz Tito, the country's communist leader seen by some at the time as the greatest son of Yugoslav nations and nationalities, has passed away. The official information was announced on national TV that Sunday afternoon in an emotional statement causing widespread grief and despair throughout the country. Hajduk and Red Star footballers received the news together with almost 50,000 fans in Split's Poljud Stadium that Sunday evening on May 4, 1980, just before the halftime. In one moment, a leading Split politician and then Hajduk president entered the commentary booth and told the radio commentator to stop the broadcast because he had something important to announce. At the same time, the referee was signaled to interrupt the game. The players and officials were immediately lined up in the middle of the pitch when the shocking information was announced on the loudspeakers in front of the stunned attendees. The 88-year-old lifelong leader of Socialist Federative Republic of Yugoslavia was already in critical condition for a certain time, and the worst was expected to happen sooner than later. Despite that, the magnitude of the announcement shocked all in the stadium, leaving them at the first moment motionless and in disbelief. Witnesses claim that the entire stadium was overwhelmed by an impossible silence. Then people on the stands started screaming and sobbing, something that immediately passed on the players and officials down to the pitch. And, in a moment, the crowd began singing a song dedicated to Tito. "Comrade Tito, we swear to you that we'll never turn off from your way." There was a lot of symbolism in that match. Hajduk was the only big team in Yugoslavia that survived the Second World War because of its refusal to play in the Football League of Fascist Italy. All other pre-war major teams were disbanded, and new ones were created instead, including the Belgrade-based Red Star and Partizan, Dinamo from Zagreb, Vardar Skopje, etc. So Hajduk was always seen as a partisan team and Split as an anti-fascist city. The encounter between the two teams represented something like Yugoslavia in a small package, a duel between Croatian and Serbian teams, with Bosnian officials and players also coming from different nationalities through the country. At the moment, they were all united in their grief, as in fact was the situation with the overwhelming majority of the population all over the multi-ethnic and multi-religious federation. Many years later, some actors recall their experiences from that night, as well as the period when the people from the now divided region lived together. Some memories tell the same story, some a different one. Macedonian footballer Boško Đurovski, who was part of the Red Star Belgrade squad on that memorable match, believes that those who say that they were not crying for Tito are simply lying. It was a terrible moment. We all knew that Tito was about to die, but the news that caught us down on the pitch broke us all. I cried like rain. Life was nice in the time of Broz, and no one cared if someone was Macedonian, Croat, Serb, Slovenian, or Bosnian. We'll never have such a sense of unity again. That's why I remember my tears for Tito, and I'm not ashamed of them, stated Đurovski on one occasion. Hajduk's legendary forward Zlatko Vujovic has similar thoughts. There are recordings, photos, videos. There is no escape from history, nor is there any reason for it. My brother Zoran fell to his knees in grief. I also cried a lot. We sat side by side with all the players from both teams. It was difficult for all of us. But Serbian and Red Star striker Dusan Savic has slightly different memories. According to him, when the match was officially interrupted, the Red Star coach Branko Stankovic was angry, and at first he didn't want the match to be postponed because he believed that we've got Hajduk. At first I smiled, recalled Savic in one interview. When asked about the moment when he received the news on Tito's death, he said, "I think that at that moment the fear prevailed of what would be tomorrow, because for decades we were taught that life wouldn't be possible without him and that he's the only thing that is worth in the country. Only later I realized the real side of the rule of Tito, the League of Communists, and the whole that bloc. But there were good times, because when you're young, everything looks good," says Savic. During the last years of Tito's life, Yugoslavia entered into the prolonged economic crisis that only deepened through the years. The Yugoslav economy was affected by the rising prices on the world markets, declining productivity, constant restrictions, and the continuous growth of its external debt. All this and much more led to the political crisis too. According to the last constitutional changes from 1974, the federation was largely decentralized with relatively weak central government and most of the effective power lying in the hands of its federative units, the republics. So, contrary to the public proclamations that people will follow the path traced by their dear leader, the pledges that were often chanted at the football stadiums too, as well as the claims that after Tito, there will still be a Tito, the situation in the society was quite different. The actual situation was increasingly showing that the ideological one-party socialist self-management system created in Yugoslavia after the Second World War, and that was maintained for more than 35 years, including on Tito's authority and his personal cult, was already broken and needed its transformation and democratization. On the other side, the country lacked its unity and a political leadership that would be able to conduct the necessary reforms. Growing political and economic crises during the 1980s gradually led to the rise of nationalist and secessionist feelings among the masses, and football stadiums were one fertile soil for their open expression. Another phenomenon that occurred at the time was the change of the attitude and the culture of the fans. Growing number of young and rebellious football supporters followed the Western patterns, examples from England, Italy, etc., and started to organize themselves in fan groups which now were able to more openly express their attitude. Thus, most dedicated supporters of Red Star Belgrade started to call themselves Delije. Their main city rivals from Partizan were increasingly known as Grobari. Dinamo Zagreb fans created a group named as Bad Blue Boys. Vardar fans called themselves Komiti. The Hajduks were Torcida, and so on. In time, most of these groups became openly antagonistic to each other. Under the existing political situation, many members were further politicized and fell under the influence of nationalist ideologies and mythologist histories. Most radical fans had criminal records, and even more, some of them had contacts with the elements of still mighty state security services. Such a situation exploded exactly 10 years later on another epic match involving Croatian and Serbian teams. On May 13, 1990, just before the start of the derby match between Dinamo Zagreb and Red Star Belgrade at Zagreb's Maksimir Stadium, huge riots erupted involving hooligans from both sides. The echo from these events surpasses the football field again. Many still believe that it was one of the triggering events that led to the final dissolution and later military conflict in former Yugoslavia. But that's another, albeit equally sad story, on which one can read more in the article Today, in 1990, a match to teach the collapse of Yugoslavia. Explore the sources used about this game and how it is remembered at the Blizzard Football Quarterly, English, or further background articles in Serbian and Macedonian. You can also watch and hear the cries in this short excerpt of TV footage from 1980. We are not going to solve if Messi or Ronaldo is the best player ever, but here is a story from Rio Ferdinand's autobiography. So when the ball went back to his goalkeeper, he, Messi, ran back and demanded the ball. The goalkeeper rolled him the ball, and Messi then proceeded to run through the entire team and score in anger. Thierry said that was what he used to do in the playground at school. I did stuff like that too against little kids. But he, Messi, did it against some of the best in the world. Yaya Toure, Puyol, Iniesta, Xavi, Busquets. And it wasn't just that one time. He did it a couple of times. Thierry said, "Can Ronaldo do that?" I said, "Well, I've never seen him do that." Thierry played with Zidane and Ronaldinho, but they never did anything like that. He said, "That's when I knew Messi was different to anyone we've ever seen." Our final bizarre world football story is a personal favorite of mine, and one that comes from the Madagascan Football League, another league that some you might not have spent a vast majority of time in, though I can't for the life of me think why not. Pretty much, all you need to know is that AS Adema beat Stade Olympique de Limirne 149-0, and they did it without scoring a single goal of their own. In the second last week of the tournament, SOE had been held to a 2-2 draw by DSA, where a controversial late penalty decision had done away with SOE's 2-1 lead. The draw squandered any chance that SOE had to beat AS Adema in the championship race, so in their following game, they decided to protest the harsh decision by scoring own goals, repeatedly. 149 of them. Spectators at the game say that SOE would kick the ball off and shoot it all the way back to their own goal, where their goalkeeper would watch it go in. Following the match, the Madagascan Football Federation suspended the SOE coach Zaka Bey for 3 years and 4 of the team's players until the end of the season. All the other players from both teams received an official warning for their involvement in the incident. The result stands as not only one of the most stupid protests ever made in world football, but also the largest defeat in the history of professional football.